Hello, my name is James Arroyo, and welcome to Chapter 5 Roles in Groups. We've previously discussed groups and how they work and the group climates that help it work either productively or positively or negatively. But now we're going to be delving deeper into groups, especially the roles that we play within these groups. These roles that we either emerge into or choose have incredibly big impacts on us. And there is no better and no more famous example of this than the Stanford prison experiment. In the Stanford prison experiment, there were Stanford college students who were half of them were placed as prisoners, half of them were put into the role of prison guards. And because of these roles that they played and due to the power differential, the guards enacted that power in very real ways, and a 2-week study turned into only a 6-day study because by that point the prison was real and they were acting in ways that were very, very unfortunate and mean, to the point where they are very much likened to how American soldiers of Iraqi inmates at Abu Ghraib were treating uh, these prisoners in Baghdad in 2004. So these roles can have a very important impact on us, so we should better understand them. Norms and roles form the basic structure of a group. We've discussed norms previously, but let's break this down a little bit. Structure is the systematic interrelation of all parts of the whole, so how things interact. Norms are broad rules that designate appropriate behavior for all group members. We know that one. But roles is the thing that we haven't discussed so far. And roles create expected behavior for individual group members. So, how each individual group member should behave. So, it's very much like the norms that designate acceptable behavior, except for instead of all the group being subject to this norm, it is just this one person. So we're going to talk about the influence of norms. There are three big effects on the influence of norms. First, role status affects norms. Affects the influence that norms have on us. Role conflict, which is um, basically if we're torn between two norms, and then also role reversal. This can be a very interesting part of how we will be influenced by these norms, or will change the influence of these norms. What I like to think of with this is that all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrance, and one man in his time plays many parts. His act begins with 7 stages by William Shakespeare. I feel like this is a very good quote regarding roles because while he wasn't thinking about communication theory, it does have a lot of application because we do play a lot of parts and a lot of roles within our lives, and that this happens and changes throughout our lives. We may be a leader later on in life, but maybe be a follower more in the beginning, but we will further discuss this. We start with role status, and there are hierarchical rules surrounding this. Role status is the relative importance, prestige, or power accorded to each for each group role. Which has more power, a father or a son? What about a manager and an employee, or a doctor or a nurse, or a doctor or a patient, or whatever? These have certain status, and we communicate with people of higher status in different ways. The rise of social media also created a status equalization effect, a leveling of role statuses among group members, especially in text-only messaging. So it is interesting to note that social media has had an equalization effect surrounding these group statuses, where the father and the son are very much in the same area surrounding social media. Whenever the power accorded certain roles establishes unequal power distribution, the potential for abuse is real. And this is seen in a lot of places where someone who has a higher role status then takes advantage of that. Famous example is Harvey Weinstein, who took advantage of his hierarchical status as a major player in a lot of movies and used it to take advantage of people. Role status differences can be a source of great discontent within groups as well. Because if someone is of higher status and lower status, then there may not be there may be disagreements surrounding that, and there would have to be role conflict or storming. Then, sometimes we are torn between two roles. Role conflict is when we find ourselves playing roles in different groups that contradict each other. The famous example of this, or the most relevant example of this, is um, mothers who have the role of mother in in the family group, but also a CEO or even a business manager, or maybe someone is the role that someone takes in an organization, and being able to manage those and being torn between those two can be incredibly challenging. The role that has the greatest importance and the most potent effect on us is usually the one we choose when deciding between conflicting roles. So, in other words, which one means the most to us, we will end up probably taking hold of instead. But there are also people who continue to be torn apart between roles and will continue to do so until something breaks. Next, we have role reversal, and this one's very interesting. This is stepping into a role distinctly different from or opposite of a role that we're accustomed to playing. A good example of this would be when I went from student to teacher. That a lot of the things that I saw as a student, I then got better understanding of as a teacher. But this also happens with families, that a mother versus child, then as we continue to grow older, then the way that most old age works is that once someone gets to a ripe old age, then they may be less able to take care of themselves, and there becomes this role reversal where then the parent is the person who is being taken care of, whereas uh, the child is then the one taking care. Reversing roles can promote an appreciation for the constraints of roles on your behavior. So it helps us understand how these things work. There are many different types of, now we will move on to different types of roles. Because by better understanding this, we will know what roles we should be taking or what roles we could potentially use to improve the quality of the group. But there are two main types, and then we're going to be talking about all of the specific types within. So the two big types are formal and informal. Formal is positions assigned by the organization or specifically designated by the group leader. So someone who says, okay, you're going to go get the information, you're going to go do research, you're going to make sure that we can all communicate together, that we're all working well together. By doing that, so that is one type where we establish formal roles. Then we have informal. And informal emerges from the group transactions, and it emphasizes function, not a position. This tends to be the norm in a lot of small groups, that it isn't usually designated. Instead, we sort of just fall into these and emerge into these roles. But there are three big types of roles: task roles, maintenance roles, and disruptive roles. Task roles are focusing on maximum productivity. The central communicative function of task roles is to extract maximum productivity from the group. So, there are many different types of task roles. The initiator contributor starts offering ideas and suggestions, lets them know, okay, starts the ball rolling and removes this primary tension. The information seeker takes inventory of the knowledge base of the group. So, in other words, sees where everyone is, making sure that and taking inventory of what knowledge we already do have. Then there's the information giver. Research. They then research the topic with the group. So they are then giving the information that they research to the group. The opinion seeker helps the group determine where agreement and perhaps disagreement exists. It is hard to share and self-disclose when in groups, because as we've stated, in some situations, by inputting, it is a little bit of a self-disclosure. So we want to be sure that we are having an opinion seeker that is trying to get this information. And that is especially true with disagreement. Next, we have a clarifier and elaborator. They explain, expand, and extend the ideas of others and provides examples and alternatives. So in other words, they expand. They are the divergent thinkers, where they will further develop what we are already talking about. There are more. The coordinator organizes where, when, and how a meeting will take place. How were you able did you have a coordinator in our first group project? And if so, and if not, would a coordinator have made this situation more effective? We also have a secretary and recorder. They serve the group memory function. Guess what? We will not be able to remember every single thing we say in a group. So, by having a secretary or recorder, someone taking that task role, it allows for us all to remember it. Then there's a facilitator, keeps participants on track, guides discussions, reminds the group of the primary goal that informs the discussion, and then regulates interactions. In general, this could potentially be this leadership role where they try to keep people on track and manage them. Then we have devil's advocate, and they gently challenge a prevailing point of view for the sake of argument to critically evaluate the strength of the ideas, solutions, or decisions. In other words, they are that check to make sure that we are not just all in just conforming for the sake of conforming, and they also critically evaluate the solutions that have been done so that we are better able to get to the right solution. So we've just talked about task goals. Now we're going to be talking about the more social aspect, maintenance roles. They focus on cohesiveness. The central communicative function of maintenance roles is to gain and maintain cohesiveness of the group. These can include the supporter and encourager. They bolster the spirit and goodwill of the group, provides warmth, praise, acceptance of others, and invites reticent members into the discussion. This is the person who is positive, using confirming communication, and is trying to get people involved, that they want to hear your input, and that they are, and when they see someone who is being very quiet, to then invite them into the group discussion. We also have the harmonizer or tension reliever. They maintain the peace, reduce secondary tension. This is the this is not the stuff, the tension that starts immediately, but then the tension that comes up throughout group development. But they relieve this by using humor and by reconciling differences among members. In other words, they make sure that everyone is working well together. And then we have gatekeeper or expediter, controls channels of communication and flow of information, regulating the degree of openness within the group, so all group members are given an opportunity to participate. This, I believe, holds two functions. First, so that everyone is able to communicate, because if one person is just dominating the conversation, then others might feel like they do not have that ability. But also, what this does is this also potentially could avoid a very common organizational phenomena of information overload, where we are talking about too many things at once. We're talking about all sorts of things, and maybe we are off track. And at that point, this gatekeeper's like, well, you know what? Let's just focus on this information. So there is kind of that task role as well. Then we get into disruptive roles. These are the people who focus on themselves or those bad apples. The central communicative function of self-centered disruptive role is to focus on the individual. So there are some ways that people do this. There are stage hogs. And these again are not ones that we should try to pick up. These just tend to be the ones that sometimes people fall into. And by better understanding them, we then now understand, oh, I may have fallen into this role and now I know to remove myself from it. We have first the stage hawk. This seeks recognition and attention. That they are like, well, look at what I did. Didn't I do a good job? It doesn't really serve a purpose and it doesn't really help the group function. Also, isolate. The person who the person who deserts the group and withdraws. This is probably the worst of this group because they have completely removed themselves from the situation, and as a result, that has communicated disconfirming communication with the group, therefore building a poor communication climate. But also it we just don't have access to that group anymore, or that person anymore. We also have the clown, and the clown diverts attention away from serious discussion of to self-centered humor. This is not that harmonizer who tries to ease secondary tension through humor, because that harmonizer is looking to the goals of the group. They are performing a group function, whereas the clown diverts attention away from the group function and does humor just to show I am funny. Also, we have the blocker. The blocker blocks action that the group finds objectionable. So they may block how we are to proceed, and we'll just continue to block things until either they get their way, or if and we don't, and they don't go, and the whole group just by attrition decides not to go down this road. The fighter and controller tries to dominate the group discussion. In other words, they are the bully, where they will try to bully people into submission so that they will be the one to dominate this discussion. The zealot tries to convert members to pet causes, so causes that are outside of the group, and instead are just, roles that only they, or sorry, goals that only they have. This may be the person who is like, well, since even though we're doing this group thing right now, you know what, I actually have a club over here and we should all go here. That obviously not very effective. And then lastly, the cynic. This person displays a sour outlook, engages in fault finding, and focuses on negative, and also predicts the group failure. In other words, they are the sourpuss. They're the person who is going to just be cynical about everything. As we've discussed, we do have a negativity bias, but it's this cynic who is well within this negativity bias, and we should be sure that we're removing ourselves from this. So, how do these roles come to be? Well, there are two main ways that the roles more or less emerge. Role emergence, however, is a relevant concern primarily to small, informal, and leaderless groups without history. If we just jump into groups, then these roles will just emerge. This can happen through group endorsement, that someone just endorses. And despite their critical importance to group success, maintenance roles are often viewed as lower status in a competitive culture such as the United States. That people will feel like the role of the achieving role, the task role will be of higher status than the maintenance role, when in fact the maintenance role, if not for that cohesive group, then the task goals can't function either. Again, keep in mind we have task and social goals, and we need both for an effective group. And this more or less proceeds through trial and error. That someone may try to be the leader, doesn't really work out, then someone else emerges as the leader. So that is very much a way that this can happen. And then once this happens, then we fall into role specialization. Role specialization is when individual members settle into his or her primary role, and that is where it tends to fall. Then, once we're there, we then have some role adaptability. Playing roles is a fluid, dynamic process. So, where you may start as an information giver and then end up acting as a harmonizer, as the nature of the group calls for. So role flexibility is adapting to the context, the capacity to recognize the current requirements of the group and then enact the role specific behaviors most appropriate in the given context. Because if I am the information giver, I'm trying to research information and provide it to the group, and then two people are fighting and no one else is handling it, then of course I should be flexible in my role and try to add to that. But we also have role fixation. Role fixation is the failure to adapt, acting out a specific role and that role alone, no matter the situation, what the situation might require. This is the person who may say, but that's not my job. Role fixation in decision-making groups can occur when individuals move from one group to another, or it can happen within a single group where maybe they were the leader in the last group they were in, but then they jump to a different group and now they're still trying to be the leader. Sometimes the groups insist on the role fixation to its own detriment, that we say, well, that's not my job, that's your job, but sometimes we do have to be adaptable. But there is balance that has to be taken, obviously. That if we are too flexible with roles, then everyone's doing everything, and there is no specialization, so that we are not able to just focus on one thing. But we also could be too fixed, where we just, no matter what, even though we need a harmonizer, that's not my job. Newcomers add into this because newcomers can cause a system disturbance. Because just like a system with new people coming in, they always add new perspectives, new behaviors, new attitudes that can shape the group in very positive or in very negative ways. So we have to better understand the nature of the group as well as group socialization. Nature of the group, uh, that the natures of groups is that there's always going to be challenges of acceptance within these groups. Characteristics that affect the acceptance of the newcomer is the level of development uh, has a direct bearing on the newcomer's acceptance. For example, if it has only been, you know, one day and now someone else wants to be added to the group, then of course that's fine. But if the group has been working for the past 3 weeks and then all of a sudden someone comes in and is like, I'd like to be a part of the group now, please, then of course it's not going to be as the people won't feel as accepted in that situation. This also speaks to friend groups and how new people getting added to the group may not be as accepted as those people who have been there quite a while. The level of group performance affects the acceptance of newcomers as well. Because if the group has not been working well, then of course they're going to try to get new people in because maybe they'll be more successful. When Jimmy Garoppolo went to the San Francisco 49ers and then the 49ers started winning, then of course they were willing to accept him as one of their own. The number of members affects acceptance of a newcomer into the group as well. Smaller groups tend to be more accepting, whereas larger groups may not be as accepting because they've already developed that group. Then we have the degree of turnover in a group also affects the acceptance of a newcomer. So if there are constantly people turning over, then there may be more acceptance. Groups are more accepting of a newcomer when members believe the newcomer embraces and will conform to the norms, values, and practices of the group. So that is one way that we can, as newcomers, attempt to uh, gain acceptance in these new groups. Then going along with this, there is also hazing. Hazing is an activity expected of someone joining or participating in a group that humiliates, degrades, abuses, or endangers them, regardless of a person's willingness to participate. People submit to this hazing because they tend to place greater value on that which is difficult to achieve, and also it creates group cohesiveness and conformity. If someone is going to go through all these trials, then of course they will there will be an expectation of conformity towards group norms. But obviously this is where it gets taken to the extreme. Now we jump into group socialization. This is mutual adaptation to change. Group socialization is the communication process in which new and established group members adjust to one another, where we are now finding ways to coordinate. Newcomers can employ several strategies to improve their chances of gaining acceptance from a group. They can conduct a thorough reconnaissance of the group by better understanding the group before you make contact, before you jump in. That can be a good way to start conforming to some of those group norms. Also, play the role of the newcomer. If someone starts off as if they were a part of the group already, then that's going to maybe lead to a lack of acceptance. Also embracing your new group and distancing yourself from previous groups. This one's interesting what because if we are trying to maintain that embrace of that old group, then the new group seems a bit disconfirmed that they obviously think that they're great, and you're saying that no, this is one that I still like. So in general, we want to be sure that we're embracing that new group. This doesn't mean to just completely reject other groups, but it does mean that when we are with that group, that we embrace this new group. Also, seek mentors within the group, people who already have been socialized, already know the rules of the land. At that point, having a mentor like that will be advantageous and will allow for more acceptance. And then lastly, collaborate with other newcomers. By working together, you start forming coalitions and therefore become a bigger force within the group. There are several strategies that are established members of groups can employ to make the role of the newcomer less challenging and intimidating. And we should strive to do these sorts of things. First, welcome new members into the group. This is something that is very simple, however, tends to be um, left by the wayside, not really considered, because it is incredibly challenging and incredibly uh, intimidating to jump into a new group. So, by acting as this welcoming member, it allows for them to understand or allows them to be a part of this new group. Also, keeping in mind that therefore it can kind of raise your stock in the group as well. But also orient new members to here's the rules, here's the norms, here's what we tend to do. When we do that, it allows it so that they are better able to conform to the group, but also that they feel more included within the group. And then also mentor newcomers, you know, becoming good friends with one of those newcomers can in fact lead to a more accepting uh, culture. That concludes this chapter. Have a great rest of your day. I will see you next time.